What is up, YouTube? Dots Gaming here, and today I'm bringing you guys the next episode of the ESO Fireside Chat Podcast. Like I always say, this is a monthly series of mine where I basically just talk about things that I'm thinking about with ESO. It's very unscripted and uncut, and it's just, a place where I get to talk about ESO as a game, suggestions, things I'd like to see, any criticisms I have, and just basically talk about whatever I want. And I always say this every time, but I just want to always make sure you guys know, if you have any suggestions, things that you want me to cover, please leave them in the comments below. Feel free to always leave a suggestion. I'm always looking for more ideas and more things to talk about for this series. It makes it really easy for me to even sit down and make this and prep for it if I know what I'm going to be doing in advance. So, as always, if you guys have any suggestions or things you want me to talk about, feel free to let me know. But today I'm going to be talking about something I wrote about on my website, but I don't know if necessarily everyone thought about it. And I think especially with Murkmire coming out, it kind of is more relevant than ever. So I want to make sure that that kind of gets as much attention as it possibly does. So if you don't want to watch this or listen to it, really, because you don't really have to watch it, you just kind of have to listen, whole point of the podcast. But if you want to read instead, there's an article on my website where I basically talk about this. I'll link it below. But what I'm going to be talking about today is how the quarterly balance changes that ESO always does and the sweeping patches that they do, quarterly, are not healthy for the game's balance. And I know many of you don't really care about game balance, you just play for fun, but for a lot of people it is a huge part of your enjoyment. So it's something that I wanted to talk about, and I do think that ZOS is sorely underutilizing their quarterly changes, but I'm just gonna go through everything. But I do think that, honestly, compared to the other MMOs on the market, ESO is one of the best ones. Obviously, it's no surprise that I say that because, I obviously love ESO, but I've played a lot of different MMOs, and ESO is one of the best in my opinion. There's a whole host of reasons why, but I do think that a huge part of any online game experience is balance. Obviously, you're playing with other players. Not everybody enjoys the same style of play. So to obviously have the most fun out of every game, you're never gonna reach it, but getting as close to balanced will make the game as much fun as it can be for everyone. Like, I know for me, in a good past MMO example is World of Warcraft Mists of Pandaria expansion. If anybody played during that time and PvP'd specifically, you will know that that was arguably one of the most balanced times in World of Warcraft PvP. You could viably play any class and any spec except for one sub-spec of a class. And for those who've never played WoW, for the most part, every single class has 3 specializations that you can play. And there's like 10 classes or more now. So that's like 30 plus different styles of play. Okay? And there was only one. It was Holy Priests. That was not viable. Everything else was perfectly playable, and that was one of the best times for WoW PvP, because no matter what class you played, what spec you played, there was a team composition for arena that you could play in, and it was awesome. It was such a fun time. And one of the things that Blizzard began to do, and obviously how Blizzard balances, that's its own subject, but that's not what we're talking about. But basically, Blizzard started to balance patch way more frequently, and they started to make changes to the balance much more frequently, and it eventually led to better balance throughout the entire game. And I think that the problem is that ZOS only balancing the game 4 times a year leads to these huge changes in the meta and these huge changes in what's good and what's bad and how do I need to change my build now since the entire game is changing and so many aspects are changing. And I think it's a huge problem. The ESO class rep program was an amazing step forward. I know people have their own opinions on it, but I know a lot of the reps personally, and I think it's an amazing program that can potentially do amazing things, but those people's feedback needs to be implemented over a period of time, not only, I think, 4 times a year. I don't think that's enough. Because we see a high number of changes in every single patch, and everyone always says they're making too many changes to the game. They always change the game so much. They make all these changes, but the reason that they do that is because they can only balance 4 times a year. If you could only change and try to fix something 4 times a year, you would try to fix as much as you can, because you're not going to be able, and I know I say fix, but you're going to be able to try and fix as much as you can, because you're only going to be able, you're not going to be able to touch it again for 3 or 4 months. So you don't want to, if there's a huge problem in the game, you don't want to under respond to it, because then it's going to be still present for another 3 or 4 months. But the issue is that the constant over-responding to the in-game problems just causes the problems to shift and swing in all of these weird directions, and you can never really get a full grasp on what's happening, and you can never fully test what's happening, because there's just so much stuff that's going on with each individual change. And it's like, ESO is such a deep and complex game, and I can't tell you how many times that even I've sat down with others and I've tried to just, theorize ways to fix problems that we've seen in the game. And, I'll come up with an answer for something, and someone will be like, well, how is that going to affect X, Y, and Z? And then they'll come up with an answer, and I'll be like, how does that affect Q, R, and P? Like, there's so much to think about. And I think only balancing the game quarterly is a mistake. I think it's a mistake. And a good example for anybody that knows, like control theory, or ever learned about control theory, I think that's the perfect example. If anybody knows about PID control, that is really the best way to look at balancing of a game, where the set point of your system is balance, where everything is relatively, playable at an equal level. And the, your variable is your current game balance. And just for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, can be best seen in like heating and air conditioning. I think is always the easiest way to describe it, because everybody has some experience with it. So I guess the best way I can think of to describe it is like, let's say you're in your room, right? You're in your room playing video games, and you're like, wow, it's really freaking hot in here. And you go and turn on your air conditioning, right? If the air conditioner worked like ZOS currently balances, so let's say it's too hot in your room. Let's say it's like 75 and you'll want it to be like 70 or 72. The air conditioner would start dumping 45-degree air into your room, and it would get really cold really quick, and you'd be like, holy shit, now it's super cold in here. So you go and you turn it to heating instead, because now you're really cold. Let's say it overshot and now it's like 65 degrees or 66 degrees. And now it's time to heat though. So we're going to start dumping 105-degree air into the room, and now your room starts to get really, really hot, and now it's back up to 74. So you switch it back to cooling, and it goes down and then up and down and then up. And you see, it's just, we get these big constant inputs to the system that make so many changes. And then you're like, oh shit, we have to go back the other way. So you start to overcompensate back the other way, and then compensate back this way, and then compensate back that way. You see what I'm saying? You continually, it's for anybody that knows, it's called hunting. You continually hunt to try to reach your point of balance. And the best way to do it, and the best way to make changes, is to make, like, let's say your room is really cold, right? And you want it to be warmer. The best way to do it is to start dumping a large amount of initial heat into the room, and then back it off and start making littler changes. I had to take a whole class on this in school, so I know a lot about it. But you start to make littler changes then. That's the way it works. That's the way PID math works. You make a huge change to your system, see what type of error there is, and then you start to slowly correct for it. And that's what ZOS needs to do. They need to make changes, okay? And I know a lot of people hear, oh, well, you're still advocating for big changes. No, there's a difference between, no, and this is no offense to ZOS, there's a difference between making big changes and what they do. They are just beyond big changes, Like if we look at like Merkmeyer specific, and the one I want to talk about most is speed, right? They nerfed speed pots, ability major expedition, forward momentum, and swift, which really all kind of play around the same topic of player movement. That's a lot of changes to make in one patch, especially when there are builds that utilize all 4 things. You know, there are builds that utilize 3 or 4 of those things. And I know a lot of people are super upset about a lot of those nerfs, but speed needed to be changed. But the best way, in my opinion, to go about it, and this is just an example, and this is mainly for a point more than anything else, is that I think it would have been a better idea if there was 4 specific issues that Zoss saw, right? Which was speed pots, player major expedition, forward momentum, and swift. I would have personally started with just forward momentum and swift. Forward momentum needed to be nerfed. If you don't think it did, I'm sorry. You're wrong. I think forward momentum needed a nerf. 8 seconds is an absurdly long amount of time. And I think that forward momentum needed to be adjusted to bring heavy back down, because it's a indirect nerf to heavy armor, which I think was necessary. Holy crap. So if you change forward momentum, right, let's say change it from the 8 seconds to 4 seconds, and then nerf swift, that's 2 pretty big changes, 2 pretty big changes in my opinion. If after that point you still feel that players are moving too fast, then take a look at speed pots. If you still then feel that players are moving too fast, then look at ability-based major expedition. Change a couple things to start. Make a couple big changes, because nerfing forward momentum by 50% and nerfing swift are 2 pretty big changes. And then make singular changes after that. That, I think, would have been a much more efficient way to go about it, But then the problem that some people are saying is that if you do that in the current ZOS balancing system, that would have to happen over 9 months? It's a long time. That is a long time. And so if ESO started to utilize their incremental patches to help balance their game, we could see those changes over the course of, instead of 9 months, we could see that over the course of 2 or 3 months, And you could, and I know I'm not 100% correct on this, or I'm not 100% sure on this, I mean. So if I misspeak, if anybody from ZOS is watching and I misspeak, I apologize. But I believe that ZOS is incapable of doing certain things during their incremental patches, because there's a limitation to them, and they'd have to take the game down for a little bit, and like a bigger patch, on patch days where they want to make mathematical changes to the game, I believe is how it works. But I'd argue that the majority of the player base would rather have the game down for a couple more hours and have it work properly and have it be better balanced than get 2 or 3 extra hours of playtime, 4 extra hours of playtime, but the rest of the week the game is just, it's not as balanced as it could be. You can even you don't have to do these huge balance you don't have to do any balance incrementals every single week. You could do them once a month, so that the game is getting balanced 12 times a year instead of 4 times a year. So that, you can still do with the incrementals. You can make 3 bug fix incrementals, like they kind of already are. And then that 4th one could be a balanced one, where you work with the class reps, you come up with, okay, how has our changes gone? How have our changes gone? They give you your feedback, you take a look at stuff, and then boom, you release an incremental with some balance changes where you fix things by a couple percent. Maybe nerf something, but 2%, 3%, nerf speed pots a little bit, nerf ability-based major expedition a little bit, start making smaller changes to see how things are over time. Same thing with shields, Shields have seen so many changes, and it's based on who you talk to, you get completely different feedback. You'll talk to Jim, and Jim will be like, shields are now useless, but you'll talk to Hank, and you'll say, Hank will be like, shields are overpowered now. But the problem is that you've changed so many things about them, and there's so much to test, and there's so much to look at, that it's they're almost effectively being buffed for PvP, but in PvE they're still being nerfed. So there was so much that happened. So again, this is just my opinion, more for make a point than anything. You could have started with just making shields receive critical strikes and slightly reduce their effectiveness. So shields would now be, by the slightly nerfing the effectiveness, you would be nerfing it from a PvE perspective, and then by letting them receive critical strikes, you'd be nerfing it from a PvP perspective, and then tune from there. If you nerfed shields too much, increase them slightly. If you didn't nerf shields enough, then look towards capping the a percentage of health pool. Oh, are they too weak? Give them resistances. Like do it like that. Kind of roll it out in stages. Don't just dump 26 changes into the game at once and then, you know, be surprised when things don't work the way you expect it. And that's the way I think is best to do it, is to make some initial changes and then tune slightly over time. You know, obviously, like I said, the initial changes need to be a bit larger. That's just the way it works. But instead of going balls out because you can only patch your game 4 times a year, you know, make some larger changes, but not as big as you currently are, and then make smaller changes in the following months. You know, you can still do it the way you're doing it, where let's say for, what was the last DLC? Wolf Hunter. For Wolf Hunter, release some big changes in Wolf Hunter, and in between Wolf Hunter and Murkmire, make those smaller changes. And then let's say there's something bigger that's still bothering you that is going to take some time to really put in the work and test out. Then patch that thing in Murkmire. Then tune it slightly over time after the dates, and then whatever the next DLC is, put in some bigger changes and then tune them slightly over time. And the reason I figured once a month is because I know ZOS does not have the biggest team at their disposal, you know? So I figured that I feel like that's pretty reasonable, where once a month you're able to incorporate some small, even if they're just slight, some small balance changes, because those slight changes will add up over time. They will. The slight changes will add up over time, and eventually you will get things close to being balanced. And again, that's also why you have the class rep program. The class rep program literally takes some of the burden and the load off of the shoulders of the balance team, because you now have players that are representative of the player base at large to help you identify what specific things need to be changed. So I don't know. To me, I think that would be the best way to do it. Again, I am just one guy. But to me, I feel like that is the best way to do it. And that really would result in better game balance over a long period of time. And I really believe that ESO as a game has so much more potential than is being utilized. Like, it is such a fun game. The systems in the game, the combat, the graphics, like everything's great. You know, the bugs and lag, that's its own topic that is not going to be addressed here. We all know about it, but I'm not going to talk about it here. That's not what this video is about. And ZOS especially has shown amazing initiative to work with its players, and that is great. You know, with the class rep program and the stream team, and that, it's all good stuff. But I think the constant, it's not even constant, but the every 3 or 4 months having these paradigm shifting balance changes, it can get frustrating over time, you know? And I think that if they started to make more frequent, smaller changes to the game, it would be much better for the players, in my opinion. I think it would be a much better experience for the player base, both PvP and PvE. But again, that is just my opinion. Would love to hear what you guys have to think about this. Please let me know in the comment section below. I hope you all enjoyed this very, very much. And if you did, appreciate if you slapped a like on the video. If you have any other suggestions as well for Fireside Chat topics, anything you would love to hear my thoughts on, please also, you can leave that in the comments below as well. And then for more content like this, other ESO videos, some Blackout and Destiny 2 content, I'd appreciate if you hit that sub button as well as hit the bell to make sure that you're always keeping notifications on. I want to thank everybody so much for stopping by today. As always, I'm Dots Gaming, and I'll see you in the next one.